Hello, I am Michelangelo Maglake, a registered psychometrician. I would be your instructor for today for the subject of cognitive psychology, and the topic is purposive or sign learning. Well, purposive or sign learning is proposed by a psychologist named Edward J. Stallman, who lived from 1886 to 1959. Well, Edward J. Stallman's theory was called purposive behaviorism, or sign gestalt, sign significance, or expectancy theory. He attempted to combine the best features of purposivism, behaviorism, and the gestalt system. It is behavioristic, and its data having been derived from objective observable behavior, and it rejects introspection. From the Gestalt theory, Tolman borrowed the concept of insight, and he was concerned with how behavior was connected with knowledge, thinking, planning, purpose, and intention. Well, Tolman did not consider learning as a matter of conditioned responses, and the core of learning consists of sign gestalt, cognitive processes which are acquired relationships between environmental stimuli and responses. In sign gestalt, the learner recognizes the significance of a stimulus and its different features. By following a series of recognizable signs towards a specific goal, learning becomes purposeful. And this system was a molar rather than a molecular behaviorism. An act of behavior has distinct properties of its own, to be identified and described irrespective of muscular, glandular, or neural processes. And the main characteristics of molar behavior is that it is purposive. It is always directed towards some goal. And behavior could not be divided into similar units, but must be perceived as whole behavior patterns. While sign learning is subject to frequent change, the emphasis is on the importance of purpose in learning a new behavior. And learned behavior is always directed and oriented towards an end or a goal. Well, Tolman also proposed chief learning construct, which is the means end readiness. Well, he proposed two forms of this means end readiness, which is the first form is stimulus 1 leading to a response 1 and then to the stimulus 2. It is said that if an organism is exposed to stimulus pattern stimulus 1, it acquires a belief that the performance of some behavior or the response 1 will lead to a second stimulus pattern or stimulus 2. The other form is the stimulus 1 to the stimulus 2, which is an organism learns that the presence of one stimulus pattern or stimulus 1 will be accompanied or followed shortly by the occurrence of a second stimulus or pattern, stimulus 2. He also had proposed this expectancy. Well, expectancy is a state aroused when a means end readiness is evoked on a particular simple occasion. It is commonly referred to as a belief. When an expectation is consistently confirmed, the organism ends up believing that if it acts in a certain way, a certain result will follow. He also provided notions on stimulus and response and defined such concepts. He believed that stimulus is a perception. It is an environmental event that is processed by the organism and thus colored by the organism's past history. He also defined response that response is not a collection of muscle twitches or glandular secretions, but learned behavior composed of performances. Tolman also proposed 6 kinds of learning. While Skinner could not agree with Guthrie and Miller as to whether there are 2 different kinds of learning or whether there is only one, well, Tolman announced 6 kinds of learning. First is the formation of catexis. Well, it is from Freud's psychoanalytic theory of motivation. But for Tolman, there is a tendency to seek certain goals when experiencing a desire. The drive resulting from food deprivation leads us to seek meat or candy, but not to seek sawdust or ants or animals. And this is due to the different cultures we have. In a culture where ants are eaten, catexis for meat are not formed. Whenever a given goal object satisfies a given drive, a catexis of that drive on that goal object tends to be formed. And the term demand, which Tolman used in his earlier writings but later abandoned, is the combination of drive and catexis. Thus, a hunger drive plus the catexis of this drive on some food would give rise to a demand for that food or the craving. Well, he also had this equivalence belief. Well, similar to Skinner's conditioned reinforcers, there are not merely beliefs which are to be followed by rewards or punishments, but cognitions that the situation itself is equivalent to the reward or punishment. An example that Tolman gives is in complex social learning, as when receiving a gold star is equivalent to receiving love and admiration for a child. The first two kinds of behavior depend on experiencing reward or punishment. He also proposed this field expectancies as a type of learning, a kind of learning. Well, cognitions about what the world is about, what leads to something, is similar to scientists' thought expectations, where nearly all of what we call knowledge comes under this heading. For example, when we learn the route from one place to another or learn what tools are used for a specific purpose, we are forming field expectancies. These field expectancies develop through experience with the object world. Demands and rewards may influence them directly by changing the person's focus of attention, but they have no necessary connection with either demands or rewards. Well, Tolman is a reinforcement theorist with regard to catexis and equivalence belief, but here Tolman proclaims himself clearly as a cognitive theorist. This is the heart of his system. Another kind of learning is the field cognition molds. It is a ways of learning, biases towards learning certain things more readily than others, which are innate but some extent learned. Well, a striking example is the use of language in a wide variety of learning situations. If one learns about maze in a laboratory, the person is likely to learn it as a verbal sequence of left and right. This makes the process of maze learning different for humans from that of animals. Well, learning of the maze is in itself a matter of forming field expectancies, whether the learning is for human or for animal. The way in which it is learned, however, depends on field cognition modes, and the differences in IQ scores and in personality among people raised in different cultures are partly attributable to differences in field cognition modes, since these produce differences in what people will learn from the same experience. He also proposed another kind of learning, which is drive discrimination, the ability to distinguish among different drives. For example, there is evidence that animals have to learn the difference between hunger and thirst. And this learning is related to the learning of catexis, in which demands are related to goal objects. This appears to be a rather another trivial category. He also proposed motor patterns. It is the muscular skills by which one actually reaches a goal, and the study of motor behavior was not of much concern to Tolman, but he deemed that they would have to be considered in a complete theory of learning. And he suggested that Guthrie's analysis of stimulus-response connections learned by contiguity may be appropriate for this kind of learning. Well, Tolman also proposed certain behavior as goal-directed actions. First, there is the behavior is goal. He believed that behavior is goal-oriented. Believe that it is a way of getting something or getting away from something. The most significant description of any behavior is what the organism is doing, what it intends to do, or where it is going. So for example, a girl is studying lessons to earn grades or maintain a scholarship. Another one is that he believes that behavior frequently makes use of environmental props or supports as means and readiness. So for example, in this belief is that a man uses a ladder in order to get to the roof. The manner in which the organism makes use of path and tools in relation to its goal characterized molar behavior is planful and as well as purposive. We also believe that behavior is molar, therefore it is docile. It is teachable and flexible. And in behavior, an organism would prefer for short and easy means to a goal rather than long or difficult ones. And this is called the principle of least effort. Well, there are certain experiments that supported that sign learning theory. Because both stimulus response and sign learning often predict the same behavioral outcome, it was necessary to design experiments to find out which theory is more accurate. The following the three things that I will discuss are experiments on reward expectancy, place learning, and latent learning. And it is said that the reward expectancy is one of the earliest and most striking experiments on reward expectancy and was made by Tinkleaugh in 1928. Tinkleaugh, Tinkleaugh, in 1928. In this experiment, food was placed under of two containers while a monkey was watching, but was prevented from immediate access to the containers. After a few seconds, the monkey was allowed to choose between the two containers. It showed the monkey's good memory by choosing the container which contained the food. Then the experimenter hid the banana under one of the containers and out of the monkey's sight. Replaced the banana with lettuce, a less preferred food, and upon turning over the correct container and finding lettuce instead of banana, the monkey was surprised, frustrated, and engaged in a definite search of behavior as though looking for the expected banana. Well, in reward expectancy, the learner anticipates the presence of a reward. If the expectancy is confirmed, then the sign gestalt is strengthened. However, if the reward is absent or changed, the behavior is disrupted. Reward is concerned with the regulation of performance but is not considered to serve as a reinforcer of correct behavior. And reward, however, seems to stress the direction of behavior, which appears to be the most promising route to the good behavior saw. The other one is the place learning. Well, experiments on place learning were designed to show that a learner is not moving from the start to the goal according to a fixed sequence of muscular or turning moments. One experiment can place learning done by Tolman and his collaborators where he sets a movement habit against a special habit to determine which one is more readily learned. Well, the response learning group was started in random alteration from locations stimulus 1 or stimulus 2, always finding food by turning to the right, that is food, and at location 1 or F1 when starting at stimulus 1 and at F2 or location 2 when starting at stimulus 2. Well, the place learning group always went to the same place for food. In this arrangement, the place learning group was more successful, and the 8 rats of the place learning group learned within 8 trials. The next 10 trials were without error, and none of the 8 rats of the response learning group learned quickly, and 5 of them did not reach the criterion in 72 trials. It's a rat experiment. And under these circumstances, it was shown that place learning is simpler and easier than response learning. Well, we also discussed the latent learning. Well, latent learning experiments showed that an animal can learn by exploring a maze without food reward, when reward was introduced later. Well, performance was better than or equal to those of rats with many previously rewarded trials. And according to Tolman, learning may take place even without a reward or a preoccupation for reward. It is not necessary to reward learners in order to secure learning. It is not important for something significant to happen after a sign stimulus occurs. And from a common sense point of view, all of us learn things, but do not continually display this knowledge. It is like a cognitive map. When the proper time comes, the learner can call up the stored image and put it to use. So, for example, an average child not in the honor roll when he or she was in the elementary grades can be in it upon reaching high school or college. Well, Tolman also raised his position on typical learning. He raised 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, six different positions in typical learning, which is the capacity, the practice, motivation, understanding, transfer, and forgetting. Well, for Tolman, the capacity recognized Tolman recognized the need for capacity law because he recognized the possible graduation of learning tasks from those requiring least to those requiring most intelligence. Well, this is natural for one who makes predictions on what animals will do in problem-solving situations and faced with the fact that one organism is different from another. And he also discussed the practice. Well, exercise is not the cause of the initial selection of the right response. More frequency with belonging of the significance with that response does not establish a certain connection. He also discussed motivation. Well, rewards and punishment tend to regulate performance rather than its acquisition. However, they are related to acquisition because they serve as emphasizer and because goal objects confirm or refute hypotheses. Because of the results of latent learning experiments, the law of effect in its usual sense, or reward as a strengthener of response tendencies, was not accepted by Tolman, although he made a few concessions later on. Well, understanding, he believed that cognitive processes are the very essence of molar behavior and learning. The prototype of learning is sensible and reasonable adjustment according to the requirement of the situation. Well, stupid learning occurs in limited cases, such as when the problem is unsuited to the learner's capacities or the setup is in inaccessible form. Insightful learning is not limited to the primates. It is a characteristic of rat behavior as well. Well, transfer, Tolman think that the problem of transfer has been relatively slight to those experimenting with animals. And to some extent, all of the experiments on change of reward, change of drive, place, and latent learning are experiments related to transfer. The ability to use something learned in one situation in relation to another. And all cognitive theories expect a large measure of transfer, provided the important relationships of the situations are observable to the learner. Well, forgetting, in one of his earlier experiments on the field of retroactive inhibition, Tolman said that it is possible that he was open towards some theory of retroactive inhibition and indicated that he accepted Freud's writing on learning theory, although in 1949 he speculated permanence of various sub-varieties. Well, Tolman felt that Thorndike's law of effect neglected the inner drives or motives. He said that aside from satisfying a state, performance must include something that would allow learners to reach their goals. I think that wraps up our lesson for today about purposive or sign learning. Well, thank you for watching. I'm not requiring, but I hope you would subscribe for more lecture video presentations. Thank you.